Today is not a day to act on every thought that feels urgent. That feeling of, I need to do something now, may not be coming from a place of truth, it may simply be the first echo to reach your awareness. The thoughts circling through your mind aren't wrong. They're just amplified. Inflated. Not by clarity, but by distance. Mercury has reached Ilion, its farthest point from the sun. And in astrology, that distance carries meaning. It's symbolic of thought drifting too far from its source of light. From its center. From divine fire. What's left behind is a mind that's still active, but no longer anchored. So today, you may find yourself flooded with ideas. Memories. Inner commands. Things that feel like insight but carry a tone that's just slightly off. You may even feel guided, only to realize later that you were following urgency, not revelation. Because when Mercury drifts this far, the mind doesn't guide. It reflects. It rebounds. It echoes your internal chaos and makes it sound like instruction. And that voice you're hearing right now, it might not be your intuition. It might just be the loudest one in the room. You start thinking, and it doesn't stop. Not because you're curious. Because you're being pulled. Your thoughts don't land gently today, they arrive sharp, urgent, sometimes repetitive. Like they're trying to prove themselves by how often they return. Like they're not interested in being understood, just obeyed. This is what it feels like when thought becomes intrusive. Not inspired. Not divine. Just loud. And the problem is, you don't always know the difference. Because the thought still feels like you. It still uses your voice. It still references your prayers, your fears, your memories. It even shows up dressed in spiritual language. But beneath the surface, something is off. The rhythm. The vibration. The pace. It doesn't wait to be tested, it demands action now. Not because it's holy. Because it's heavy. Mercury has reached its Ilion point, the farthest distance from the sun, and your mind is now drifting in that same disconnected orbit. The light is no longer near enough to burn away the confusion before it forms. You're not receiving illumination. You're just surrounded by mental weather, and not all of it belongs to you. And so the thoughts become more frequent. More intense. More manipulative. They act like signals, but they're actually shadows, shadows of what you're afraid to feel, what you've been avoiding, what you still haven't resolved. They're trying to break through, not to guide you, but to be heard. Because when the light steps back, what's been hidden gets louder. You begin to assume every thought is important. Every sensation is a message. Every urgency is spiritual. But that's where the test lies. Because not all guidance today will come clean. Some of it will show up in the form of pressure. Some of it will disguise itself as insight. Some of it will echo louder just because the rest of your system has gone quiet. Isaiah 55 verse 8 says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts," and this is one of those days when that truth becomes painfully clear. The thoughts you're having may not be divine. They may not even be yours. They may be the reflection of past conditioning. The residue of someone else's projection. The echo of a story you thought you were finished telling yourself. And still, you'll want to follow them. You'll want to believe that what arrives first is what's most true. That's how the mind works when it's cut off from its anchor. It grasps. It reacts. It doesn't wait. But real intuition waits. Real clarity is patient. Real knowing doesn't need to shout. That's the tension of today. You're not being tested on what you hear. You're being tested on whether you pause long enough to question it. Because today, ideas don't land, they push. And you're not wrong for sensing them. You're not weak for considering them. You're simply being asked to engage with them differently. To stop treating every mental nudge like a sacred appointment. To stop assuming every inner voice is a command. This isn't a time for obedience. It's a time for observation. There is nothing wrong with your discernment. But your discernment needs more time than usual to catch up. Because today's thoughts move too fast for truth to follow closely. They shift in tone. They change direction. They present themselves as clear, and then change meaning halfway through. And if you move on them too quickly, you'll be chasing the shape of a thought that was never solid to begin with. This is why silence matters now more than ever. Not the absence of thought, but the ability to watch thought without becoming it. To see a vision and ask, is that mine? To feel the pull of an idea and say, maybe. But not yet. To hear a message in your head and delay just long enough to notice whether it holds or fades. Because most things that disappear when you stop reacting to them were never rooted in clarity. And some of the most dangerous thoughts you'll have today are the ones that feel exactly like your purpose, but carry none of its weight. They mimic your mission. They speak your language. But they want to be acted on too soon. They don't give you room to verify. They don't allow stillness. They weaponize your sensitivity. And in an atmosphere like this, even wise people make poor decisions. Even sensitive people misinterpret. Even intuitive people mistake volume for confirmation. So here's what you do instead: you step back. You slow the process down. You listen to your thoughts without feeding them. You write them down instead of reacting to them. You say, I see you. But you're going to have to stay with me a little longer before I do anything with you. You treat every thought like it's passing through a gate. And not every thought gets to pass. Because today, your mind is not a safe container. It's an open field. And that field is catching every signal in range. Spiritual. Emotional. Subconscious. Old. Projected. Foreign. Familiar. They're all here. They're all talking. And the real gift is not in choosing which one is right. It's in knowing when none of them are ready yet. This is a waiting room. And most of what you hear today is just trying to fill the silence. So let the silence be louder. Let your thoughts spin without dragging you with them. Let your questions hang unanswered. Let the brilliant idea float without turning it into a plan. Let the warning stay a feeling until it's confirmed. Because thought is intrusive today, not intuitive. And you are not being punished for hearing too much. You're being sharpened in your ability to resist turning every sound into a signal. The air today isn't empty. It's heavy with interference. You walk into a room, and something feels off. No one says anything, but you feel the weight. You check your phone, and a message shifts your whole energy before you even read it. You try to focus, but everything around you feels like it's vibrating at the wrong frequency. That's not coincidence. It's saturation. The field is full. This isn't the kind of darkness you're used to fighting. This is noise disguised as light. The spiritual atmosphere right now is thick with things you can't quite name. Collective fear. Subtle anxiety. Projected thoughts that don't belong to you but stick to you anyway. Emotional debris that didn't come from your story but still clings to your field like static. The space around you is loud, even when no one is talking. Even when you're alone. Especially when you're alone. And here's the dangerous part: it doesn't feel dark. It feels urgent. Familiar. Holy, even. This is not deception by distortion. This is deception by density. When Mercury drifts this far from the sun, thought detaches from clarity. And in that vacuum, everything gets louder. Not just your own inner voice, but the voices of others. The voices of the past. Of the collective. Of energy that hasn't been cleared. And because it all lands in your intuitive system, you begin to assume it's all divine. But it's not. Some of it is just static. You're not only sensing your own signals today. You're receiving frequencies from people you haven't seen in months. From spaces you left behind but never cleared. From old stories still echoing because they were never closed properly. And it's not all malicious. It's not even all negative. It's just too much. That's the risk. Not darkness, but overload. You're absorbing everything, but without time to separate what belongs to you and what doesn't. And in this kind of environment, even your strongest inner compass gets pulled slightly off-center. Not because it's broken, but because it's surrounded by too many competing vibrations. You may hear something that sounds spiritual, but it's built on someone else's fear. You may feel drawn to an idea that matches your prayers, but it's charged with unresolved grief. You may receive a dream or image that seems meaningful, but it's stitched together from fragments of other people's confusion. And you don't realize it at first. Because it looks clean. It feels aligned. But underneath, it's not rooted in clarity. It's rooted in noise. 2 Corinthians 11 verse 14 says, "Even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light." That's what today feels like. Not full of obvious lies, but full of convincing copies. Energies that sound like your intuition, but are just volume without truth. Thoughts that mimic divine guidance, but are only reverberations of what everyone else is projecting. They wear your language. They echo your emotions. But they're not yours. That's why today isn't about shielding from darkness. It's about filtering through light. Not everything that glows is guidance. Not every thought that lands with force is meant to be trusted. And not every pull on your spirit is divine. Some are just the result of a wide-open channel receiving too much input without pause. You haven't failed, you've just become too porous. So the test is this: can you stay grounded when the field around you is charged with everyone else's fear? Can you sense the difference between your own inner nudge and the collective emotional static flooding the atmosphere? Can you hold space for what rises in your system without reacting to it right away? Because what's trying to lead you today might not be a message. It might just be residue. You're picking up the echo of someone else's panic. The longing of someone who still wants to access your energy. The projections of people who haven't done their own clearing. And your gift makes you sensitive to all of it. You were never meant to block it entirely. But you were meant to discern. Discernment isn't just knowing what's real. It's knowing what's yours. And today, the most dangerous things are the ones that feel familiar. That carry your emotional fingerprints. That reflect something you've prayed about, and then pretend to be the answer. But they're only reflections. They mimic your shape, but they don't carry your soul. And if you move too fast, you'll mistake recognition for resonance. You'll assume the signal was sent by God just because it fits your inner dialogue. But fit isn't confirmation. Familiarity isn't divine. And clarity doesn't compete for your attention. It waits. That's why your stillness today is more than self-protection. It's spiritual hygiene. The quieter you become, the easier it will be to feel what doesn't belong. Not because it screams, but because it doesn't settle. It stays restless. Tight. Off. And the longer you sit in awareness without jumping to interpretation, the more those false frequencies start to dissolve. Some of them only exist because you gave them meaning. When you stop reacting, they lose power. So yes, the atmosphere is filled with spiritual static. But static only affects those who don't pause to recalibrate. You still have authority. You still have access. But today, your access isn't through intuition, it's through restraint. Through the decision to wait longer than usual before naming what you sense. Let the field swirl. Let the signals overlap. Let it all become noise for a little while, until what's real finds its own weight. And when it does, you won't have to chase it. You'll just recognize that it never needed to compete in the first place. You send the message, and it lingers unread. You say the prayer, and it echoes back without a trace. You reach for a sign, a response, a whisper, and receive nothing but the still weight of your own anticipation. In a different moment, this might not bother you. But today, it cuts deeper, not because nothing is happening, but because something within you has started to equate the delay with denial. And once that association is made, every second of silence begins to feel like abandonment. But this is not abandonment. It's an invitation to recalibrate your sense of divine timing. When Mercury reaches its farthest point from the Sun, communication loses warmth. Words don't land. Thoughts stretch out into uncertainty. The space between what you send and what comes back is wider, slower, less direct. And in that wide space, distortion creeps in. You don't just wait, you interpret the waiting. You assign it meaning. You tell yourself the silence is personal, when in fact, it's structural. Cosmic. Scripted. But your spirit, so used to flow and rhythm, isn't used to the pause. And that pause begins to feel like rejection. So you check your inbox again. You reread the message you sent. You scan the silence for signs of offense, mistake, failure. And all the while, you are being tested, not in whether you heard right, but in whether you will stay steady when nothing responds to your clarity. Because clarity doesn't guarantee immediate feedback. Some truths require space before they echo back. This is the distortion of Mercury at Elion. It takes ordinary delay and wraps it in emotional projection. It turns waiting into evidence. It turns divine silence into a personal wound. And it amplifies the gap between seed and sprout until you start to doubt that you ever planted anything at all. But Habakkuk 2 verse 3 says, "Though the vision tarries, wait for it. It will not delay." That is not a contradiction. It is a spiritual paradox. Delay is not delay when timing is divine. It is not absence. It is alignment. The vision may feel late according to your watch, but it's right on time according to what it was designed to grow into. And that time doesn't adjust for your urgency. It waits for your capacity. This is a day when the silence is not meant to be broken. It is meant to be held. You are being trained in how to wait without weakening. How to recognize that when nothing responds, you don't have to reinterpret the promise, you simply have to stand still long enough for the echo to find its way through a slower sky. Because rejection doesn't always come in the form of no, sometimes, it comes as a delay that convinces you to walk away before the answer can arrive. That's the risk now, not being denied, but denying yourself the reward by walking out too soon. You are in the middle of something. And in the middle, nothing looks complete. Nothing feels secure. But that doesn't mean it's over. It means it's unfolding. And if you panic in the pause, you'll miss the purpose of it. Because delay isn't just a test of patience. It's a test of alignment. It's an invitation to look inward and ask, do I only believe when things move? Do I only trust when I get the answer I expected? Do I know how to stay when the light doesn't flicker on cue? Divine silence is not the absence of relationship. It is the maturing of it. It is what happens when God no longer feeds you with immediacy, but with weight. With space. With the trust that you will still remain, even when heaven is quiet. And today, heaven is quiet. Not because it has nothing to say, but because it's already spoken. And now, it's watching how you hold the word you were already given. Watching how you carry the vision that hasn't landed yet. Watching how you respond to space that feels empty but is actually full of design. So wait. Not with anxiety. Not with accusation. Wait like someone who knows the difference between silence and abandonment. Wait like someone who has learned that presence doesn't always arrive in words. Wait like someone who trusts the pause, not because it feels good, but because it has been scripted by something wiser than your fear. You're not being ignored. You're being watched, to see whether you can wait without rewriting the promise. And if you can, what's coming next will not feel like recovery. It will feel like confirmation of something you never let go of, even when the silence tried to make you keep still. The answer was never missing. It's still coming. Just not in the voice you expected. Not in the hour you preferred. But in the moment your faith proved it could hold its shape without being held. You think the test is about whether you heard right. Whether you made the correct choice. Whether you moved at the right time. But it isn't. The test today is not of your knowing, it's of your response to not knowing. The divine isn't watching your action. It's watching your stillness. It's watching what you do when the path blurs, when the sky goes quiet, when the next step is no longer illuminated and yet you're still standing. There are days when clarity is your guide. This isn't one of them. Today, there's too much noise, too many signals, too many almosts. The atmosphere is filled with partial truth, ideas that seem right, doors that feel open, feelings that resemble guidance. But that's the trick. The most dangerous form of confusion doesn't arrive as contradiction, it arrives as half-alignment. Jesus wasn't tempted with chaos in the wilderness. He was tested with scripture. With familiar words slightly twisted. With options that looked holy from the outside but hid compromise underneath. He wasn't asked to betray his identity. He was invited to prove it through misused power. And that's exactly how spiritual distortion works. It doesn't tell you to abandon your calling. It tells you to fulfill it faster than God planned. To reach it your way. To shortcut the process under the illusion of spiritual urgency. That's the test you're in right now. You've been given just enough insight to feel responsible. Just enough silence to feel unsure. And in the tension between those two, the temptation is subtle but strong, to act early, to fill the gap, to grasp for something conclusive before the story has even finished unfolding. But this is where discernment matures. Not in the clarity, but in the confusion. Not in the knowing, but in your posture inside the fog. Can you resist the need to explain what hasn't revealed itself? Can you let something feel incomplete without forcing it into form? Can you sit with mystery without assuming it's a threat to your purpose? This is no passive test. It is deeply active. You are not being asked to sit still because you're weak. You're being asked to hold still because you're trusted. Because not everything can be revealed to people who rush to label the unknown as failure. Some revelations are so holy they require silence to even begin. And today, that's all you've got. Silence. A thick quiet between one signal and the next. A strange pause in divine communication. And yet, even now, something is watching, not to see what you'll produce, but what you'll preserve. Will you protect the integrity of the unknown? Or will you twist it into something usable just to soothe your fear of being directionless? There is a fear that rises in moments like this. It doesn't shout. It disguises itself as responsibility, obedience, spiritual maturity. It tells you that sitting still is dangerous. That waiting is wasteful. That uncertainty is an enemy of purpose. But that voice isn't the spirit. It's static. And it comes from every part of you that's still uncomfortable with ambiguity. But ambiguity is where transformation happens. You don't become who you are through endless revelation. You become who you are when God stops explaining, and starts watching. Watching what you do when the scroll hasn't been unrolled yet. Watching what you trust when the pattern disappears. Watching whether you reach for noise, or hold out for truth. Because in the absence of clarity, the counterfeit always arrives first. Not to destroy you. To tempt you. To see if you'll accept imitation wisdom just to avoid discomfort. To see if you'll accept partial light just to escape the tension of being in the dark. But you don't have to. You're not here to pass a knowledge test. You're here to become the kind of person who doesn't move just because the atmosphere is tense. You're here to become the kind of person who can hold a space open long enough for the real thing to enter. That's what God is watching right now. Not your moves. Your middle. Not your insight. Your silence. Not your outcomes. Your obedience to wait. So let the questions rise without answers. Let the signals swirl without sorting them. Let the pressure build without reacting. This isn't the moment to resolve. This is the moment to refine. You are being refined by what you don't know. And the fire of not knowing is exposing every place in you that still tries to earn peace through productivity. Every place in you that believes discernment is about constant interpretation. Every place in you that equates faith with movement. This is the kind of day that doesn't reward those who know. It strengthens those who remain when there's nothing left to interpret. When the signal hasn't landed. When the guidance hasn't returned. When the spirit feels quiet. And still, you stay. Because that's the kind of vessel the next level of clarity needs. One that's been emptied. One that doesn't rush to fill itself. One that waits for what is true, no matter how long it takes to arrive. And it will arrive. But today, that's not the point. Today is not about receiving it. It's about proving that you won't chase anything that isn't it. If nothing feels clear today, don't rush to fix it. That lack of clarity might be the most divine thing you'll encounter. When God pulls back the light, it's not to confuse you. It's to see what you do when clarity isn't your compass. Because real direction never forces its way through urgency. It waits until you're still enough to hear something quieter than thought, something called truth. The atmosphere right now is charged. Thoughts are echoing louder than usual. Insight is tangled with projection. And even your intuition may feel like it's not working the way it used to. But don't let that push you into premature action. Today is not about what lands in your mind. It's about how much noise you're willing to let pass without needing to name it. 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5 reminds us, take every thought captive, not to destroy it, but to examine it. To sort what is divine from what is just loud. That's not spiritual avoidance, it's spiritual maturity. So if you felt the tension today, if the signals clashed and the silence pulled tight, but you chose stillness instead of reaction, comment, 777. That's your way of saying, I didn't move just because it got loud. And if you want more like this, more spaces to sort signal from noise, subscribe now. Because the truth doesn't need to compete. It will arrive, and when it does, you'll recognize it.